everybody. Welcome to Zoo School Live here at Elmwood Park Zoo. I'm Keeper Eric, and we're going to have a hoot of a time today because today we're going to be talking about burrowing owls. So obviously our burrowing owls here at Elmwood Park Zoo also share the exhibit with a number of other species, our Montezuma quail and our chihuahuas, and of course we're going to talk all about them as well. Before we get started, however, we did receive a wonderful picture from Gavin from Gilbertsville of a drawing of Inca. And I gotta say, he really captured the way she likes to try and kill me with her eyes. So, Gavin, well done. All right, now on to our, what we refer to as the herpiary here, because we have a mix of both birds and reptiles in here. The first animal I'm going to point out, since this is mainly about burrowing owl, but if you look back there on the little perch back there, that is Dorothy, our female burrowing owl. Now, Dorothy is 3 years old, and she came to the zoo just a couple years ago. Now, you might also see Oz guarding the tunnel right now because it is nesting season for burrowing owls here at the Elmwood Park Zoo. They're starting to show signs of trying to build a burrow and all that, so they're being a little bit protective of it as Dorothy does her little squats and her little chatters right now. She's just letting everyone know that she's kind of queen bird of the exhibit. Now, speaking of birds, we have two other birds in here as well. They are our Montezuma quail. And their names are Monty, who is the male, who is the most colorful and is showing off just a little floofy nugget right now. So right here is Monty, our male, and the little brown one behind him is Zumi, our female. So our Montezuma quail here are both 5 years old, which is approaching a little bit older age. Kind of the record in captivity is 8 years, which is much longer than it would be out in the wild. And these guys are kind of referred to almost as phantom birds because these guys are very hard to find out in the wild because they're hiding in grasses, and as soon as they hear something, they kind of explode out of the brush and fly very far, very fast away. So you barely can see them out in the wild. But as you can see here, they're quite fluffy, and they might even go over to the sand and do a sand bath. They're kind of looking like they might want to roll around in the sand in a little bit with how fluffy they are, but they are obviously very calm here, and they're very much used to us. Now, the last two animals that we have in here are Guapo, who is our big male, sitting over here on our heat rock. He is a chihuahua. These guys can live in here with the birds because even though burrowing owls might eat lizards out in the wild, they would not take on anything this size. He is way too big for anything like a burrowing owl to go after. And he is strictly a vegetarian, so he is also not going to really be messing around with any of the birds in here. Although he is kind of king of the rock. That is definitely his spot, and the birds do respect that very much so. So our female chihuahua, she is currently high up in the tree, and we have called her Stubbs because her tail, as you can possibly see at the tippy top of that tree there, is a little shorter than Guapo, so we've nicknamed her Stubbs. Stubbs and Guapo are also 5 years of age as well. So these guys out in the wild, they live in the desert. So these guys like lots of heat, which is why Guapo is on the rock, and lots of sun, which is why Stubbs is going up to the top of the tree to catch some nice UV rays from the sun. And that's because these guys, being strictly vegetarians out in the wild, they need to have a lot of energy to burn through the grasses and the fruit that they normally find, especially because they're a very rough vegetation out there. So these guys need a lot of energy and a lot of heat, which they get from the sun, to give them enough energy to really digest all those strong plants. But we'll come back to them in a little bit, but let's refocus back in on our burrowing owls. And we're going to focus up on Dorothy over here doing her squats, letting everyone know she's in charge right now. So Dorothy here, like I said, is 3 years old, and I forgot to mention Oz is 9. So Dorothy is in breeding age right now, which is why she's a little more flighty and a little more guardy of the nest right now, which is why we're not actually in there with them right now. We want to keep them nice and calm during this time of year, so that's why we're kind of filming from the outside, or else her and Oz will probably just be in the nest box making rattlesnake noises at us. And rattlesnake noises is actually one of the best defenses these guys have, because obviously their name kind of gives it away. They're called burrowing owl. These guys live in burrows, normally made from other animals like, well, for instance, sometimes abandoned rattlesnakes, gopher tortoises, and the main one is prairie dogs. So old tunnels that prairie dogs kind of abandoned, burrowing owls will move into. So since it is kind of this tunnel that a lot of animals, if they kind of smell like a bird or maybe a little mammal, and you have a coyote thinking, hey, I really want to try and get in there and see if I can find a snack, the burrowing owls will actually make rattlesnake noises. Now the babies will actually do it fairly often, like any sort of movement or noise around the burrow. It'll sound like a whole group of rattlesnakes, like it's a big rattlesnake den in there, and not even a big coyote or a wolf or anybody like that wants to mess with a rattlesnake, so they back off. So that's one of their best defenses that they have. So speaking of the young themselves, a very unique feature about burrowing owls is these guys can have a lot of babies. And when I say a lot of babies, I'm saying a whopping a lot of babies for owls. So a lot of times the most a great horned owl, let's use as an example, might have is anywhere from 2 to 4. And they're much, much bigger than burrowing owls. But these little burrowing owls can actually lay up to 6 to 12 eggs, which is a lot of eggs for a tiny little bird, and especially an owl that has to then feed all of those little mouths, because they can have up to 12 babies. So one mechanism these guys use, besides going out and finding lizards and mice and things like that to feed their young, a male will decorate the burrow that he's trying to use to encourage the female to come to with bison poop and grass and hay and just all kinds of smelly, kind of disgusting things to our nose, but is actually ooh la la for the little female burrowing owl, because the more poop you have, the more insects you're going to attract. And that's actually how they can feed all 12 babies, is they actually create a habitat that encourages all these insects to kind of hang out and live and just breed in this burrow. And it's kind of a self-sufficient feeding that then allows the babies to get constant food from the burrow itself, while also the poop and all that helps out with the humidity and the temperature of the burrow as well, to make sure that the eggs are in a more humid environment, even though they might be out in the middle of the desert. So a lot of us like to refer to these guys as... Sorry about that, we lost a little Wi-Fi there, but we are back. Okay, so where I was talking was how these guys will have all those babies and use the bugs to help feed them, as well as going after things like little mice and lizards also are things that the burrowing owls will use to feed their young. So these guys can live up to 8 to 12 years. Oz is a little up there now at 9 years of age, but he has many years still left in him. Yeah, we'll come on over to Oz with that cute little face. Oz actually came from the Brandywine Zoo, and he came up over here, so he didn't move too far around. So these guys all were born in captivity. Now, something kind of important to mention is that this is our only really bird of prey that we have currently here at the facility that doesn't have anything quote-unquote wrong with them or came from a rehab center. The reason being is these guys are considered extremely endangered out in the wild, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife actually is trying to create more, and they needed the help of accredited zoos to be able to regain that population growth. Now, all our other birds, like our eagles, our falcon, and all that are from rehab birds and are not able to be re-released out in the wild. But our goal here with our burrowing owls is to help strengthen the captive population so that we have enough genetics to help repopulate these fairly isolated populations. And that's kind of weird to think about, that a bird that can fly is isolated from each other. And that's just because for a burrowing owl, going across a giant city or even over the mountains is quite a big adventure for them. They are very good flyers, but there is a range to every animal. And it also is such a big risk for them to have to go into human population areas, because there's not really some safe areas for them, with cats being let out into the wild, and also just not really having safe places for them to land, because they are fairly skittish birds. Although some of them do take up residences in playgrounds or people's large backyards in these areas, and they do a very fantastic job, the people in those regions, to actually then section off that area and make sure that even the burrowing owls that might be laying eggs in the middle of a very popular playground will not be disturbed, because, like I said, these guys unfortunately are fairly threatened or endangered across the United States. Now, these guys also are found up in Canada as well, and they are doing great work up there. And those burrowing owls are a little bit different than the southern ones. They have many different subspecies throughout North America, and those ones are a little more used to snow, obviously, but their habitat is still fairly similar, with kind of the low grasses and more the open prairie habitat for them. So, to talk about why these guys are endangered and threatened in the wild, I mean, it all comes down to human interference. The two big ones are, for the Floridian ones, it's actually the hotels and the development of all these big casinos and hotels in prime burrowing owl burrow areas. Because it does take a very certain soil for these guys to be able to create these burrows and how they live. So a lot of these prime real estates are on beaches or near beaches, and obviously everybody wants to vacation in Florida, which means that there's an ever-growing demand to have more houses and more hotels on the land that burrowing owls call home. Actually, they do have a fun book I do suggest out there called Hoot, where it talks about a group of kids trying to save Floridian burrowing owls. It's a great book, and kind of just talks about how these little owls are very secretive sometimes, and you never know what animal is living there where they're trying to develop. So obviously the prairie guys, you might think, well, there's a lot of open land out there. There's big ranches and all that. Can the burrowing owls just simply lay there? And actually the biggest problem is the destruction of the black-tailed prairie dog population. So even though they might not eat black-tailed prairie dogs, they do use their burrows a lot of time for nesting. And the issue with that is that ranchers do not like prairie dogs at all. Namely, it's a mine of little holes everywhere that they get very nervous about their cattle walking across. They do have issues with the cattle walking into a hole and hurting their legs. So a lot of ranchers out there don't like prairie dogs and try to evict them from their property. Now the problem with that is that then the burrowing owls don't have as many homes to pick from, and they also sometimes get the brunt of the ranchers trying to destroy these burrows so that their cow don't hurt their legs walking across, but it eliminates the homes that the burrowing owl normally like to stay in. Going back to our Montezuma quail, because little Zoomy right here is being all fluffy and really trying to check us all out right now. So like I said, this is Zoomy. She is the female. She is a duller color because of how brown she is, and that's because she would be the one that's kind of hanging out more on the nest out in the wild. So the females don't want to be very decorative because they're actually supposed to really be the ones hiding. Now Monty is way more colorful, and that kind of helps attract a female. Now a fun fact about all bird species is actually even the dullest looking bird to us actually might be very bright and colorful to the eyes of other birds. And that's because, unlike humans, most bird species actually have the ability to see ultraviolet rays. So what we refer to the colors that we see, like reds, greens, yellows, blues, all that is visible light. Ultraviolet light is, of course, the ones that we refer to as, oh, that's what gives us sunburns. But it's also super important for reptiles because that kind of helps give them energy a lot of time. And it's also very important for birds because with the ability of seeing ultraviolet rays, it almost just ridiculously increases the amount of different colors these birds can see. So for example, the human eye can see 1 million colors. A bird's eye can actually see 100 million colors. So that's 99 million colors that we can't even fathom. So even though you might see a crow or even little Monty here, that's a little brown speckled bird, she actually has the ability to be way more colorful than we could even imagine just simply because we can't even see it. So she currently is looking for some crickets right now that we're throwing in there. These guys out in the wild eat a lot of insects and they do eat a lot of vegetation as well and seeds. So that's why they have kind of the long toes to kind of dig up any sort of bugs or insects or anything delicious that they might be having around. All right, time for some questions, all right? So Lisa's going to read them off to us, and then I'll answer them to the best of my ability. So, oh, and she's dropping things. Hold on, sorry. All right, Elisa, read them off.
All right, it looks like Max would like to know, what is the lifespan of a burrowing owl that lives in the wild?
Very good question. So the burrowing owls in the wild normally hang around 8 to max of 12 years, but in captivity there has been some records of going much, much older than 12, like maybe even 15. But in the wild, kind of averages more around 8 years of age. So that's a fantastic question.
Sophia would like to know, how old are Monty and Zumi, the Montezuma quail?
All right, Sophia. So our little Monty and Zumi here are both 5 years of age. And in captivity, the kind of max age that's ever been recorded is 8 years. So they are kind of more senior citizens, let's just say, but they still have a lot of spunk to them. So they still have a lot left to show us and enjoy us here at the zoo.
Lakia would like to know, what is the quail's favorite thing to eat?
Oh, great question. So if you look over at this bowl over here, our keeper gave a nice deep bowl because it's a little harder for them to have to pick out of, and sometimes they like to jump in there and swirl around in it. So they really like the lettuce, and they do have what is called Missouri game bird as well. But their favorite thing when it's nesting season, I have to say, is crickets. And even though these guys might be a little more skittish, I have had little Zumi jump up onto my knee for a cricket. So I would definitely say that's kind of one of their favorites.
Zachary would like to know, how old are Guapo and Stubbs, the chihuahuas, and do you know their birthdays?
Oh, that is a great question. All right, so Stubbs and Guapo are currently both 5 years old right now. I don't remember the exact date, but I do know that Guapo's definite birthday month was actually back in March.
Sophia wants to know why there are lizards in the same exhibit with the burrowing owls and the quail.
Oh, that is a great question. So one goal that we have here at Elmwood Park Zoo and most zoos across the world is we want to show you guys these animals in the most natural exhibit as possible. And the best ways to do that is if we can match a bunch of animals that really do not have any sort of issues living with each other in the same exhibit. Not only does it make it more fun for you guys, because it is kind of like a scavenger hunt trying to find these animals, as if you were out in the wild looking around in kind of the Arizona Sonoran Desert, looking to see all around you. As well as it actually being quite enriching for the animals as well. I've seen the quail actually sleeping with the lizards sometimes, so you never know who actually becomes friends in these mixed species exhibits, but we do a lot of research before we ever combine any sort of animal combination and take advice from other facilities as well.
Just a comment, Candy wanted to let us know that she has actually seen wild burrowing owls do their squats in the wild.
Oh my goodness, I would love to see wild burrowing owls do it. Some of the keepers here for exercises, just because Dorothy does spot us from afar, and since she knows it, sometimes if we start squatting, and you can't see it, but I'm starting to squat to her right now, so she's squatting back. So this is how we kind of make sure that we keep up with our exercises here, is that we kind of squat down with little Dorothy. So clearly we'll just be here kind of squatting with her, and she gets all excited sometimes. But now she's distracted. She's like, I have enough squats today. My thighs are hurting.
Gretchen would like to know the lifespan of burrowing owls in the wild and in captivity.
Okay, great question. So, in the wild, like I said before, they're more around 8 years of age. In captivity, a little more closer to 12 to 15 sometimes as well. All depends on the individual animal, but these guys have a lot of veterinary care and have kind of more of an advanced diet than they might have in the wild, because these guys always get a wide range of different food, from crickets to mealworms to waxworms to mice to all kinds of fun little chicks as well. And the whole purpose of that is giving them a wide range of nutrients in their diet, which means that these guys then have a lot more nutrients and health, and sometimes out in the wild as well, there's kind of drier seasons, which means that there's not as much food available for them. So that's why they can survive so much longer in captivity.
Grace and Lammy Pie would like to know where these types of owls more specifically typically live in the wild.
Great question. So these guys are more kind of the California area burrowing owls. The Floridian ones from most of the looks are kind of much darker, since it's a more darker vegetation over there. They're kind of more underneath trees and in shadows and all that, where these guys are more the California kind of desert burrowing owl.
Cameron would like to know what the burrowing owl's favorite thing to eat would be.
Oh, great question. So I'd have to say, along with the quail, they like crickets probably the best. And that's probably because here at the zoo, we don't ever feed live mice or anything like that. We get them all frozen like you would for your pet snakes and all that. But we obviously feed them crickets, and they like to scurry all around the exhibit. And Dorothy very much likes to run around like a little velociraptor, clawing at them, just like you see from Jurassic Park.
Faith would like to know if the chihuahuas can drop their tails.
Great question. So the chihuahuas really can't drop their tails too much. Obviously, if they really need to, it wouldn't really hurt if they lose part of it due to a predator. But these guys are actually extremely quick, and unlike a gecko and all that, it's more in line for them to sprint away, where a gecko might be a little slower to move, so they kind of have more the defense of the chunky tail.
Speaking about predators, Rebecca would like to know what are typical predators of burrowing owls, and how do burrowing owls defend themselves against those predators?
Great question. So obviously, pretty much one of the main ones are foxes and coyotes going after their burrows. And then what they do is they'll make the rattlesnake noises to make it, the coyotes and the foxes think that there's actually a rattlesnake hole, that this isn't an owl hole anymore. And that normally freaks them out, because nobody messes with a rattlesnake. As for other locations, other owls, like great horned owls, might go after a burrowing owl. But the interesting thing about burrowing owls is they actually are more awake during the daytime than at night. They are more diurnal than nocturnal. So these guys normally really only have to deal with the same predators as we would, as well as a lot of hawks, where that's why a lot of times, unless they're hunting, these little guys are right next to their burrow. And we'll live in kind of small groups sometimes, where there's a couple burrowing owl burrows next to each other. And one of the big reasons why they like to hang out near prairie dogs, because prairie dogs are normally the alarm call for the region if there's a predator nearby. So if they hear a prairie dog alarm call go off, they're right down that tunnel.
Awesome. I think we have time for a couple more questions. It looks like first we would shout out to Genevieve, whose birthday it's going to be in 4 days. So happy early birthday, Genevieve.
Yes, happy birthday.
And Amelia would like to know if burrowing owls migrate.
Oh, great question. So burrowing owls don't really migrate. They do kind of move out when the males are hanging out with their moms still. They'll move to further locations and all that. But most of the time, these guys don't really migrate as we would think of songbirds or gooses or anything like that. Even the ones that live up in Canada, they will stay in their burrows throughout the wintertime.
Maria would like to know if burrowing owls come in different colors or if they're typically this brownish color.
So typically they are kind of more this brownish color, but there are many different colors of brown and white combinations, as well as a little bit darker brown, a little bit of lighter brown. All depends really on the region that they're from, but most of the time they're pretty much all the same consistent, basic look of it all.
And I think this is our last question for right now. Lizzie and Jaden would like to know if the burrowing owls are nice to the zookeepers.
So they are very nice to us even when it's breeding season. Dorothy most of the time likes to stay at the top of the tree when we're in there. She kind of does her own thing. Oz will kind of hang out with us. Sometimes if we get a little too close, they'll make rattlesnake noises at us. But they're not swinging down at us even when they have eggs or are protecting their nest during breeding season. They kind of just hang out. So these were all fantastic questions, and just as I normally do, I do have an owl-related joke for you guys, and it goes, what do you call an owl that does magic? Houdini. You like that one, Lisa? Lisa liked that one. So thank you guys so much for tuning in once again. And don't forget to check us out every weekday at 11 o'clock for our Zoo School Live here at the Elmwood Park Zoo. Thank you guys so much and can't wait to see you guys real soon.